There is a moment in every person's life when they reveal exactly who they are. Not through the words they rehearse in front of a mirror. Not through the image they carefully craft on social media. But through the way they treat a stranger when they believe nobody that matters is watching. This is the story of that moment. And the man at the center of it had absolutely no idea that the 60 seconds he was about to live through would unravel everything he had spent the last 15 years building. It was a Tuesday morning in early October. The kind of morning where the air in New York City carries that first real bite of autumn. Leaves skittering across the sidewalks of Queens. Taxi horns already blaring at 6 a.m. like the city was born angry and never learned to calm down. John F. Kennedy International Airport was its usual controlled chaos. Terminal 4 hummed with the energy of thousands of passengers dragging roller bags, clutching boarding passes, and staring at departure screens with the anxious eyes of people who were either running from something or running toward something. Gate B27 was the departure point for Delta Flight 1249, a nonstop service from New York to Los Angeles. The aircraft was a Boeing 767, the kind with the wide body and the generous first-class cabin. 14 seats up front, separated from the rest of the plane by a thick curtain and an invisible line that some people treat like a border wall. Boarding had just begun. The gate agent's voice echoed through the terminal, calling first-class passengers and those with priority status. A slow procession of business travelers, frequent flyers, and the quietly wealthy began filing down the jet bridge. Among them was a woman. She moved without hurry. Her steps were measured, deliberate, the kind of walk that belongs to someone who has learned that rushing is a luxury she no longer needs. She wore a tailored navy blazer over a cream silk blouse. Simple gold earrings. A watch that most people wouldn't recognize unless they knew watches, and if they knew watches, they'd know that the one on her wrist cost more than most people's cars. She carried a single leather bag, well worn but immaculate, the kind of bag that gets better with age because it was made by hands that understood what permanence means. No monogram. No logo. Just quality so deep it didn't need to announce itself. She nodded politely to the flight attendant at the door, handed over her boarding pass, and walked to seat 2A, the window seat in the second row of first class. She placed her bag in the overhead bin, settled into the wide leather seat, and pulled out a thin leather portfolio. She opened it, reviewed a few pages, and then closed her eyes for a moment, as if she were gathering herself for whatever lay on the other side of the country. Her name was Monica Carter. And if you have never heard that name before, don't worry. That was entirely by design. Now, about 4 minutes after Monica took her seat, the energy at the front of the plane shifted. You know the feeling. That sudden disturbance in the air when someone enters a room carrying too much noise, too much entitlement, too much of whatever it is that makes people unconsciously lean away. Like the cabin pressure changed, except it wasn't the cabin pressure. It was a man. He came down the jet bridge like he was late to his own coronation. Red-faced. Tie loosened. Roller bag slamming against the walls of the narrow corridor with every step. He was talking on his phone loudly, the kind of conversation designed to let everyone in earshot know that he was important. Fragments of the call drifted through the cabin like shrapnel. Tell them the deal doesn't close without my sign-off. I don't care what time zone they're in. Yeah, I'm boarding now. First class, obviously. He ended the call as he reached the first-class cabin and stood in the aisle. His eyes swept the rows. Seats. Passengers. And then his gaze stopped. On Monica Carter. Now, I need you to understand something. What happened next took less than 10 seconds. But those 10 seconds contained a lifetime of assumption, a century of prejudice, and a depth of arrogance so profound that it would take an earthquake to shake it loose. The man looked at Monica. He looked at her seat, 2A, first class. He looked at her face. He looked at her skin. And something shifted behind his eyes. A calculation. A conclusion. The wrong conclusion. He didn't whisper. He didn't lean in. He spoke in a voice loud enough for half the cabin to hear. "You're in the wrong section. First class isn't back there." He pointed toward the back of the plane. Toward the curtain. Toward economy. Passengers in the surrounding seats went still. Conversations died mid-sentence. A businessman in 3C slowly lowered his newspaper. A woman in 1D stopped scrolling her phone and looked up with wide eyes. The cabin became a theater, and every single person in it understood exactly what they were watching. Monica Carter did not flinch. She did not raise her voice. She did not stand up. She did not do any of the things that years of this kind of treatment might have trained another person to do. Instead, she looked at the man the way you might look at a cloud passing across the sun, a temporary inconvenience that would move on its own. And she said, in a voice so calm it could have steadied a ship in a storm, "No, sir. I'm exactly where I belong." 7 words. Delivered without anger. Without fear. Without the slightest tremor. And in those 7 words, if the man had been listening, truly listening, he would have heard a warning. He would have heard the quiet confidence of a woman who had been underestimated so many times that she had stopped keeping count. He would have heard power. Real power. The kind that doesn't need to raise its voice because it has never needed permission to exist. But he wasn't listening. Of course he wasn't. Instead, his face twisted into something between disbelief and outrage. He turned on his heel and marched toward the galley, where a flight attendant was organizing the beverage cart. "Excuse me," he said, his voice dripping with the kind of authority that is borrowed, never earned. "That woman in 2A. She's in the wrong seat. I need you to move her." His name was Daniel Whitmore. And he had just set in motion the worst 24 hours of his entire life. But he didn't know that yet. No one on that plane did. Except maybe Monica Carter. Because something in her eyes, something quiet, something ancient, something patient, suggested that she had seen this movie before. And she already knew how it ended. What Daniel Whitmore did not know, what he could not have guessed in 1,000 years, was that the woman he was trying to have removed from her seat held the power to remove him from something far more important. His career. His reputation. His entire life as he knew it. And the clock had already started ticking. To understand what was really happening on that plane, to truly grasp the scale of the mistake Daniel Whitmore was making, you need to know who these 2 people were. Not just their names. Not just their seats. But the roads that brought them to Gate B27 on that particular Tuesday morning. Because this story isn't really about an airplane. It's about 2 worlds colliding at 35,000 feet. And only one of those worlds was going to survive the impact. Monica Carter. Monica Elaine Carter was born in Baltimore, Maryland, the second of 4 children raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs and still found time to make sure every one of her kids finished their homework before they touched the television remote. Her mother, Dorothy, cleaned office buildings at night and worked the register at a grocery store during the day. She never complained. She never explained. She simply did what needed to be done, and she did it with a dignity that her children absorbed through their skin. Monica was the quiet one. Not shy, there is a difference. She simply preferred to watch, to listen, to understand the shape of a room before she decided how to fill it. In school, she was the student who sat in the second row, never the front, never the back, and answered questions only when she was certain her answer would be the best one in the room. Her teachers called her reserved. Her mother called her strategic. Her mother was right. Monica graduated from Morgan State University with a degree in finance, then earned her MBA from the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania. She could have gone to Wall Street. Every major bank came calling. But Monica had watched her mother work for other people her entire life, and she had made herself a quiet promise somewhere around the age of 14. she would build something of her own. And build she did. By the age of 32, Monica had founded her first company, a financial consulting firm that specialized in helping mid-size businesses restructure their debt. It wasn't glamorous. It didn't make headlines. But it made money, and more importantly, it made a difference for the small business owners who walked through her door carrying the weight of payroll they couldn't meet and loans they couldn't service. By 38, she had launched her second venture, an investment group called Meridian Capital Partners. Meridian started small, but Monica had an eye for value that bordered on supernatural. She didn't chase trends. She didn't follow the herd. She studied companies the way a surgeon studies an X-ray, looking for what was broken, what was healthy, and what could be saved with the right intervention. Within 5 years, Meridian Capital Partners held significant stakes in 11 companies across 4 industries: technology, healthcare, renewable energy, and logistics. Monica's portfolio was quietly enormous. She sat on the boards of 3 publicly traded companies, though she always requested that her attendance be listed under the name of her firm rather than her personal name. Because here is the thing about Monica Carter that made her different from nearly every other person at her level of wealth and influence: she did not want to be known. She had no social media presence. No Wikipedia page. No profile in Forbes or Bloomberg, despite multiple requests from both publications. She declined every speaking invitation that came with a photographer. She donated generously to causes she believed in: education, housing, maternal health, but always through her foundation, never in her own name. When people asked her why she was so private, she always gave the same answer: I didn't build what I built so that people would know my name. I built it so that it would outlast my name. On that particular Tuesday morning, Monica had just finished a meeting at the Four Seasons Hotel in Midtown Manhattan. It was the kind of meeting that doesn't appear on any public calendar: a 3-hour negotiation with the principals of a European pension fund over a $200 million co-investment in a clean energy startup. The deal had gone well. Monica had secured terms that would give Meridian Capital a controlling interest while limiting downside exposure. She was tired, but the good kind of tired. The kind that comes from winning a fight that nobody else saw. Now she was headed to Los Angeles for a board meeting the following morning. One of the companies in Meridian's portfolio, a tech firm called Pinnacle Systems, was preparing for a major product launch, and Monica wanted to review the quarterly projections in person. She had booked her usual seat, 2A, because she liked the window. She liked watching the country pass beneath her, all those tiny lives and tiny lights, and reminding herself how far she had come from the apartment in Baltimore where she used to fall asleep to the sound of her mother's keys in the door at midnight. Daniel Whitmore. Daniel James Whitmore was born in Westport, Connecticut, a town where the lawns are green, the fences are white, and the problems are the kind that can be solved with a phone call to the right person. His father was a regional sales director for a pharmaceutical company. His mother volunteered at the local library and shared the PTA with the organizational ferocity of a 4-star general. Daniel was the oldest of 2 boys, and from a very early age, he understood that his family occupied a specific rung on a specific ladder, and that the whole point of life was to climb. Not because climbing was noble, but because the view from the top was the only view that mattered. He was athletic in the effortless way of boys who are fed well and coached early. Soccer, lacrosse, tennis. He was decent at all of them, excellent at none. In school, he was bright enough to get good grades without working too hard, and charming enough to talk his way out of the situations where his grades slipped. His teachers described him as confident. His classmates, when they were being honest, used a different word. Daniel attended the University of Virginia, majored in business, and graduated in the middle of his class. He joined a management training program at a large technology company called Nexus Digital, one of those sprawling firms that make software for other businesses, the kind of company whose name you recognize but whose product you couldn't explain at a dinner party. He spent 15 years at Nexus Digital, climbing from associate to senior associate to team lead to his current position, Regional Director of Client Solutions for the Western Division. It was a title that sounded impressive at cocktail parties, and Daniel had spent years making sure it sounded even more impressive than it was. He managed a team of 12 people. He reported to a vice president who reported to a senior vice president who reported to a C-suite executive who reported to the CEO. In other words, Daniel Whitmore was 4 levels removed from any real decision-making power. But he didn't see it that way. In his mind, he was essential. Indispensable. The kind of man the company couldn't function without. He told himself this every morning while knotting his tie, and he told other people this every evening over expensive drinks that he put on the company card. He had convinced himself that the view from his rung was very nearly the top, and that the distance between where he was and where the real power sat was merely a matter of time. He was wrong about that, too. On that particular Tuesday morning, Daniel was flying to LA for a client pitch meeting. His company had booked him in business class, which was perfectly fine for someone at his level. But Daniel had used his miles to upgrade to first class, because Daniel believed that where you sit on an airplane says something about who you are. He believed a lot of things like that. The car you drive. The neighborhood you live in. The restaurant where you eat lunch. These were the metrics by which Daniel measured the world, and by which he measured everyone in it. Especially the people he believed didn't belong. So when Daniel Whitmore walked onto that Boeing 767 and saw a black woman sitting in first class, sitting in his row, occupying space that his internal compass told him was reserved for people who looked like him, something short-circuited behind his eyes. It wasn't a thought, exactly. It was more like a reflex. The same reflex that makes a person flinch at a loud noise or pull their hand away from a hot stove. Except this reflex wasn't protecting him from danger. It was protecting him from a world that didn't match the picture he had drawn in his mind. In Daniel's world, first class had a certain look. A certain tone. A certain complexion. And the woman in two-way did not match that picture. So he did what people like Daniel always do when reality contradicts their assumptions. He decided that reality was wrong. The flight attendant's name was Rachel. She was 29 years old, had been flying for 6 years, and had developed the kind of diplomatic skill set that should qualify her for a position at the United Nations. She had dealt with nervous flyers, angry drunks, medical emergencies, a man who once tried to open the emergency exit at 30,000 feet because he thought it was the bathroom, and a woman who demanded that the entire cabin be sprayed with essential oils before takeoff. Rachel had seen it all. But the look on Daniel Whitmore's face when he approached her was something different. It wasn't just anger. It was certainty. The absolute, unshakable conviction of a man who has decided that the world has made a mistake, and that he is the only one qualified to correct it. "Excuse me," Daniel said, and his voice carried the sharp edge of someone who was used to having his requests treated as commands. "The woman in 2A, she's in the wrong seat. I need you to check her ticket and move her." Rachel looked at Daniel. She looked toward seat 2A, where Monica was calmly reviewing her documents, seemingly unaware of or unbothered by the conversation happening 10 feet away. Then Rachel looked back at Daniel. "Of course, sir. May I see your boarding pass first?" Daniel handed it over with the impatience of a man who believes that bureaucratic processes are things that happen to other people. Rachel glanced at it. He was in 2B. The aisle seat. Right next to Monica. "And your name, sir?" "Daniel Whitmore." "That's my seat, 2B. But clearly there's been some kind of mix-up with 2A. Rachel nodded, not in agreement, but in the way that flight attendants nod when they are buying time to figure out how to handle a situation without making it worse. She walked calmly to seat 2A. "Ms. Carter? I'm so sorry to bother you. May I just confirm your seat assignment?" Monica looked up from her portfolio. Her expression was patient. Not annoyed. Not nervous. Just patient. The way a person looks when they have been through this exact scenario so many times that it no longer has the power to surprise them, only to disappoint them. She reached into the pocket of her blazer, pulled out her boarding pass, and handed it to Rachel without a word. Rachel looked at the boarding pass. She looked at the seat. She looked at the boarding pass again. Then she walked back to Daniel, and something in her posture had changed. Her spine was straighter. Her smile was thinner. Her eyes had taken on the cool, professional glaze of a person who is about to deliver a truth that the recipient does not want to hear. "Sir," Rachel said, and her voice was perfectly level, perfectly polite, and perfectly clear. Ms. Carter is seated correctly. Seat 2A is her assigned seat. Your seat is 2B, right here beside her. She gestured toward the empty aisle seat. Would you like to take your seat? We'll be pushing back shortly. Now, a reasonable person, a decent person, would have felt the heat rise in their cheeks, mumbled an apology, sat down, and spent the next 5.5 hours staring at the seatback screen praying that the woman next to them would put on noise-canceling headphones and pretend the whole thing never happened. Daniel Whitmore was not that person. Instead of sitting down, instead of apologizing, instead of doing any of the simple, human things that separate adults from children and civilized people from the other kind, Daniel doubled down. That can't be right, he said, louder now. Loud enough that passengers in rows 3, 4, and 5 had stopped pretending they weren't listening and were now openly staring. Check it again. There's obviously been a mistake. Rachel's smile didn't waver. Sir, I've confirmed the boarding pass. There is no mistake. Ms. Carter is in her correct seat. I paid a lot of money for this ticket, Daniel said, and there it was, the sentence that people say when they have run out of logic and are reaching for the only argument they have left, the argument of money. As if the amount on the receipt determined the validity of the complaint. As if first class was a members-only club and the membership fee came with the right to choose your neighbors. I'm sure you did, sir, Rachel replied evenly. And so did Ms. Carter. Now, would you please? You need to move her to economy. The sentence dropped into the cabin like a stone into still water. Ripples spreading outward. Passengers exchanging glances. Eyebrows raised. Jaws set. The silence that followed was the kind that hums, the silence of 24 people holding their breath, waiting to see what happens next. And then Daniel Whitmore opened his mouth one more time, and he said the thing that would seal his fate. He leaned toward Rachel, lowered his voice just enough to create the illusion of discretion while remaining perfectly audible to everyone within 15 feet, and said, Look. People like her don't belong up here. It's obvious. Just look at her. She probably got the seat by mistake or used someone else's miles. Just handle it. People like her. 3 words. 3 small, ugly, devastating words that contained a universe of meaning. 3 words that stripped away the thin veneer of a seating dispute and revealed what this had always been about. Not the seat. Not the boarding pass. Not the ticket price. Horror. A black woman. In first class. Existing where Daniel Whitmore had decided she did not have the right to exist. The cabin reacted the way a living thing reacts to a wound. A sharp intake of breath from the woman in 1D. A slow headshake from the man in 3C. A young couple in row 4 who exchanged a look that said, "Are you hearing this?" without either of them speaking a word. And in seat 2A, Monica Carter closed her leather portfolio. She folded her hands in her lap. And she looked at Daniel Whitmore with an expression that was harder to read than a locked safe. She wasn't angry. Or if she was, the anger was buried so deep beneath decades of practice that it didn't reach her face. She wasn't hurt. Or if she was, the hurt had been compartmentalized into a room she would deal with later, on her own terms, in her own time. What she was, and this is important, was still. Perfectly, completely still. The stillness of a woman who had learned long ago that the most powerful thing you can do in a moment like this is nothing. Because nothing denies the aggressor the reaction they are seeking. Nothing takes the stage away from the performer and gives it back to the audience. Nothing lets the truth speak for itself. Meanwhile, in rows 4 through 8, 3 separate passengers had quietly pulled out their phones and begun recording. The cameras were discreet, held at waist level, propped against seat back pockets, tucked between headrest and shoulder. But they were rolling. And they were capturing everything. Every word. Every expression. Every ounce of contempt on Daniel Whitmore's face. The first video would be uploaded to social media before the plane left the runway. The second video would go viral before the plane reached cruising altitude. The third video, shot from an angle that perfectly captured both Daniel's sneer and Monica's composure, would be viewed 17 million times in the next 48 hours. But all of that was still in the future. Right now, in this moment, the only thing that mattered was what Rachel the flight attendant said next. Rachel took one step back from Daniel Whitmore. It was a small step, no more than 6 inches, but it was deliberate. The kind of step a person takes when they are creating distance between themselves and a situation that is about to get worse before it gets better. "Sir," she said, and now there was something new in her voice. The warmth was gone. The diplomatic smile had been replaced by something flatter, something that looked more like a shield than a welcome. "I verified the boarding pass. Ms. Carter is in her assigned seat. I need you to take your seat so we can prepare for departure. We're already behind schedule." "I'm not sitting next to," Daniel began. "Sir." Rachel's voice cut through his protest like a blade through paper. "I'm going to get the lead flight attendant. Please remain here." She turned and walked toward the front galley. Daniel stood in the aisle, his face cycling through shades of red that didn't exist in nature. He was gripping the headrest of seat 2B so tightly that his knuckles had gone white. Around him, the first-class cabin had become a fishbowl, and he was the specimen. The lead flight attendant arrived 30 seconds later. Her name was Patricia, and she had been flying for 22 years. She had the bearing of a woman who had managed more crises at 40,000 feet than most people experience in a lifetime. Silver-haired, square-shouldered, eyes that had looked into the face of turbulence, both meteorological and human, and decided that neither was going to rattle her. "Good morning, sir. I'm Patricia, the lead flight attendant on this aircraft. I understand there's a concern about seating?" Her voice was warm, but it was the warmth of a courtroom judge, measured, controlled, and completely aware that the person in front of her was on trial whether he knew it or not. Daniel seized on her presence like a drowning man grabs a life preserver. Finally, someone who can actually do something. "That woman," he pointed at Monica without looking at her, as if she were a piece of furniture that had been placed in the wrong room, "is in the wrong seat. I've been trying to explain this, but your colleague didn't seem to understand." Patricia nodded once. Slowly. "Sir, Rachel has already confirmed the boarding passes. Ms. Carter's seat assignment is correct. She is a first-class passenger on this flight." "That's impossible." "It's not impossible, sir. It's fact. Look, I don't know what's going on here, but I paid for first class, and I expect a certain," he paused, searching for the word. "Standard." The word fell out of his mouth like a dead bird. Standard. He said it with the emphasis of a man who believed he was being subtle, who believed that the poison in his meaning was hidden beneath layers of plausible deniability. But everyone heard it. Every single person in that cabin heard exactly what he meant. Patricia heard it. And something shifted behind her eyes. The warmth didn't disappear, it hardened. Like lava cooling into rock. She straightened her spine and took one step closer to Daniel. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, and her use of his name, gathered from the boarding pass Rachel had shown her, carried the weight of a gavel. "I'm going to be very clear with you. Every passenger in this cabin has a confirmed seat. Every passenger in this cabin has paid for their ticket. The only disruption on this aircraft right now is this conversation." She paused. "Let the words settle. I need you to take your seat immediately. If you are unable to do so, I will have no choice but to involve the captain, which may result in your removal from this flight. Do you understand?" The word removal hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Daniel's face changed. You could see the calculation happening in real time, the realization that he was no longer in control of this situation, that the power he had assumed was his had been quietly, firmly taken from him by a woman with 22 years of experience and zero tolerance for this particular brand of nonsense. He looked around the cabin. Saw the faces watching him. Some with anger. Some with pity. Some with the blank, recording light on stare of people holding their phones at exactly the right angle. He muttered something. It was inaudible to most of the cabin, but the woman in 1D, who was closest, later told reporters that he said, "This is ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous." And then, finally, grudgingly, like a man lowering himself into a cold bath, Daniel Whitmore sat down in seat 2B. For about 45 seconds, there was silence. The cabin exhaled. Rachel and Patricia exchanged a look that contained an entire debrief. Passengers returned to their phones, their books, their carefully cultivated disinterest. And then Monica Carter spoke. She didn't turn to face Daniel. She didn't raise her voice. She continued looking straight ahead, her hands folded over the leather portfolio in her lap, and she said, "Sir, I travel often. This isn't necessary." That was all she said. 8 words. Quiet. Almost kind. The kind of sentence a teacher might say to a disruptive student, or a mother might say to a child having a tantrum in a grocery store. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't an insult. It was a door, held open, offering Daniel the chance to step through it and into something resembling decency. He didn't take it. Instead, Daniel let out a sound, something between a scoff and a laugh, the kind of sound that is designed to communicate that the person making it considers the other person beneath them. He shifted in his seat, angled his body away from Monica as if proximity to her was a hardship, and muttered, just loud enough for her to hear, something that the passenger in 3B later described as vile. The exact words were never confirmed. But the tone was unmistakable. It was the tone of a man who had been forced to accept a defeat in public and was nursing his humiliation the only way he knew how, by turning it into cruelty aimed at the person he blamed for his embarrassment. The plane pushed back from the gate. It taxied to the runway, waited its turn behind 2 other aircraft, and then accelerated into the gray October sky, climbing above the clouds and banking west toward California. For the next 5 hours and 26 minutes, Daniel Whitmore sat in seat 2B, radiating hostility like a space heater radiates warmth, except there was nothing warm about it. He ordered 2 scotches from Rachel, who served them with the mechanical precision of a person who was counting the minutes until she could file an incident report. He did not speak to Monica again. He did not look at her. He pretended she did not exist. Monica, for her part, read. She reviewed documents. She made notes in the margins of what appeared to be a financial report. At one point, she fell asleep for about 40 minutes, her head resting against the window, her face as peaceful as someone who had long ago decided that the opinions of strangers were not heavy enough to carry. Now, here's what Daniel Whitmore did not know as that plane sailed across the country at 540 miles per hour. He did not know that the company he worked for, Nexus Digital, the firm where he had spent 15 years climbing from associate to regional director, was partially owned by an investment group called Meridian Capital Partners. He did not know that Meridian Capital Partners had acquired a 12% stake in Nexus Digital 3 years earlier, making it the firm's 3rd largest institutional investor. He did not know that the founder and managing partner of Meridian Capital Partners was the woman sitting 18 inches to his left. Monica Carter. The woman he had tried to have removed from her seat. The woman he had publicly humiliated. The woman he had described as people like her. That woman controlled more of his company than his own boss did. And he did not know, could not have known, that while he sat there sipping his scotch and stewing in his bitterness, the internet was already doing what the internet does best. The first video had been posted before the wheels left the ground. The caption read, "Man tries to get black woman removed from first class. Her response is everything." By the time the plane crossed the Mississippi River, the video had been viewed 400,000 times. By the time the plane passed over the Texas Panhandle, it had crossed 1 million. By the time the pilot announced the initial descent into Los Angeles, the video had been shared by 3 verified accounts with a combined following of 9 million people, and the hashtag first-class racism was trending in 7 countries. And Daniel Whitmore, sitting in seat 2B with his second scotch and his clenched jaw, had absolutely no idea that his life was being dismantled in real time, 1 share, 1 retweet, 1 horrified comment at a time. The plane touched down at LAX at 11:47 a.m. Pacific Time. Daniel stood up before the seatbelt sign was off, grabbed his bag from the overhead bin, and was the first person off the aircraft. He walked quickly through the terminal without looking back, as if speed could separate him from what he had done. Monica Carter waited until the aisle was clear. She gathered her things, thanked Rachel and Patricia by name, and walked off the plane with the same measured calm she had brought to it. The two of them would never be in the same room again. But they were about to be connected in a way that neither of them had planned, and only one of them would survive it. Daniel Whitmore woke up on Wednesday morning in his hotel room in Santa Monica. He showered, shaved, put on a crisp blue shirt and a gray suit, and checked his phone. 47 missed calls. Not the usual 2 or 3 from colleagues or the occasional spam. 47. From his boss. From his boss's boss. From the head of human resources. From his wife. From his brother. From numbers he didn't recognize. 47 missed calls, and beneath them, a cascade of text messages that scrolled on, each one more urgent than the last. The first text, from his direct supervisor, read, "Daniel, call me immediately. Do not go into the office until you speak with me." The second, from a colleague on his team, read, "Dude. What did you do? You're all over the internet." The third, from his wife, read simply, "We need to talk. Now." Daniel's stomach dropped. Not the slow, gradual descent of worry. The sudden, elevator shaft plunge of a man who realizes that something catastrophic has happened while he was sleeping, and that the catastrophe has his name on it. He opened his browser. Typed his own name into the search bar. And the screen filled with his face. His face, contorted with contempt, leaning toward a flight attendant, pointing at a woman he didn't know. His face, captured from 3 different angles by 3 different passengers, played on loop in videos that had been viewed millions of times overnight. His face, frozen in a screenshot that had become the banner image on news articles with headlines that made his blood turn to ice. First-class bully, man tries to remove black woman from airplane seat. Viral video shows passengers' racist tirade on Delta flight. People like her, the 3 words that ended a man's career. Daniel put his phone down. Picked it up. Put it down again. His hands were shaking. His mouth had gone dry. The room, which had seemed perfectly comfortable 12 hours ago, now felt like a cage. He called his boss. The conversation lasted less than 3 minutes. His boss spoke in the clipped, careful sentences of a man who was reading from a script prepared by the legal department. The words were precise. Do not come to the office. An investigation has been opened. Human resources will be in contact. Do not speak to the media. Do not post anything on social media. Do not discuss this with anyone at the company. Daniel asked if he was being fired. His boss paused. Then he said, "The investigation will determine the next steps." "But Daniel, I need you to understand the severity of this situation." "It was a misunderstanding," Daniel said. "I just thought she was in the wrong seat. That's all it was. A misunderstanding." The silence on the other end of the line was the loudest sound Daniel had ever heard. What Daniel did not know, what he would not find out until the following day, was what had happened inside the executive suite of Nexus Digital that morning. The video had reached the CEO's desk by 9 p.m. the previous evening. By 6 a.m. Wednesday, the CEO had convened an emergency meeting with the chief legal officer, the head of human resources, the vice president of communications, and the senior vice president of investor relations. The mood in the room was, by all accounts, somewhere between panic and fury. The vice president of communications laid out the situation. The video was everywhere. It had been covered by major news outlets. The company's name had not yet been publicly linked to Daniel, but it was only a matter of time. Social media users were already combing through his LinkedIn profile, and his employment at Nexus Digital was listed right there for anyone to see. The head of human resources pulled up Daniel's personnel file. 15 years of employment. Satisfactory performance reviews. No prior incidents of this nature. But also no record of distinction, no major wins, no irreplaceable relationships, no institutional knowledge that couldn't be replicated. And then the senior vice president of investor relations said the thing that changed the temperature of the room by about 40 degrees. "I need everyone to understand something," she said. She pulled up a slide on the conference room screen. It was a chart showing Nexus Digital's top institutional investors. Our third largest shareholder is Meridian Capital Partners. Meridian holds 12% of our outstanding shares. They have a seat on our board. Their managing partner has been instrumental in our strategic direction for the past 3 years. She paused. Meridian Capital Partners is owned and operated by Monica Carter. Another pause. Monica Carter is the woman in the video. The room went silent. Not the ordinary silence of a pause in conversation, but the crystalline, razor-edged silence that descends when a group of intelligent people simultaneously realize that a bad situation has just become a catastrophic one. The CEO leaned back in his chair. Closed his eyes. When he opened them, his decision had already been made. The calculations were simple. A 12% shareholder. A board member. An investor whose firm had provided critical funding during the company's last expansion. A woman who, if she chose to, could move her stake, withdraw her support, and trigger a chain reaction that would wipe hundreds of millions of dollars off the company's market capitalization. Versus Daniel Whitmore. A mid-level regional director whose name the CEO had to look up in the company directory. It wasn't even close. Human Resources called Daniel at 2 p.m. The meeting was conducted over video conference. Daniel sat on the edge of the hotel bed in his suit, his tie still perfectly knotted, as if dressing well could somehow protect him from what was coming. The HR director was accompanied by the chief legal officer. They informed Daniel that his conduct on the flight constituted a violation of the company's code of conduct, specifically the sections pertaining to personal behavior that reflects on the organization, discriminatory conduct, and actions that damage the company's reputation and stakeholder relationships. Daniel tried to explain. He used the word misunderstanding 4 times. He said he didn't know who Monica Carter was. He said he didn't mean what the videos made it look like he meant. He said the whole thing had been blown out of proportion. The HR director listened. When Daniel finished, she read from a prepared statement. Effective immediately, your employment with Nexus Digital is terminated. You will receive your final paycheck and any accrued vacation pay in accordance with company policy. Your access to company systems has been revoked. Please return all company property within 14 days. The call lasted 11 minutes. When it ended, Daniel sat in the silence of his hotel room and stared at the blank screen of his laptop. 15 years. Gone in 11 minutes. He had walked onto that plane believing he was an important man. He walked off that video call as a cautionary tale. And here is the part that will stay with you long after this story is over. It wasn't just the job he lost. In the days and weeks that followed, the ripples of that 60-second confrontation spread outward in every direction. His name became a punchline. His LinkedIn profile was flooded with messages from strangers. Former colleagues distanced themselves. Job interviews that had been casually discussed were quietly cancelled. His wife, humiliated by the public exposure, moved to her sister's house with their 2 children. She told him she needed space. The kind of space that doesn't have a return date. Daniel Whitmore lost his career. He lost his reputation. He lost his marriage. He lost the carefully constructed identity he had spent 44 years building, and all because he could not accept the simple, fundamental, human idea that a black woman had every right to sit in the seat she had paid for. All because he decided, in a moment of arrogance so pure it could have been bottled, that he knew who belonged in first class and who did not. He was wrong. And being wrong cost him everything. Now, before we get to the final part of this story, I want to ask you something. And I want you to be honest, not with me, but with yourself. Have you ever watched someone be dismissed, belittled, or disrespected in public and stayed silent? Not because you agreed with what was happening, but because it was easier to look away? Because the confrontation wasn't yours? Because you told yourself someone else would step in? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one, and I think this is a conversation worth having. And if this story is hitting you the way it's hitting me, I need you to do one thing. Hit that subscribe button. Not for me. For the stories. Because we tell stories like this every week, stories about power, justice, consequences, and the moments that reveal who people really are when they think nobody is watching. Subscribe so you never miss one. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. 1 week after the incident on Delta Flight 1249, Monica Carter attended the annual Meridian Capital Partners Investor Conference in San Francisco. It was the kind of event that doesn't make the evening news but moves billions of dollars. 300 guests. Invitation only. The kind of room where the net worth and attendance could pay off a small country's national debt. Monica gave the keynote address. She spoke for 40 minutes about emerging markets, energy transition investments, and the future of responsible capitalism. She was precise. She was brilliant. She was everything she always was, the kind of speaker who makes complicated ideas feel like common sense and makes the audience wonder why they hadn't thought of it first. During the Q&A session that followed, a journalist in the back row raised his hand. He worked for a financial news outlet, and the question he asked had nothing to do with markets or investments. Ms. Carter, the video from the airplane last week has been viewed over 20 million times. Your name has been identified. You've been called, and I'm quoting here, the most composed woman in America. Do you have any comment on what happened? The room went quiet. 300 people leaned forward in their seats. Monica looked at the journalist. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She tilted her head slightly, the way she always did when she was choosing her words with the care of a jeweler setting a stone, and she said, "Respect costs nothing. But disrespect can cost everything." That was it. 10 words. She didn't elaborate. She didn't mention Daniel by name. She didn't express anger or vindication or satisfaction. She simply stated a truth clean, complete, and utterly devastating in its simplicity, and then moved on to the next question, which was about renewable energy tax credits. The audience applauded. Not the polite, rhythmic applause of a conference. Real applause. The kind that starts in one corner of the room and sweeps forward like a wave, carrying with it the accumulated admiration of people who had just watched someone demonstrate a level of grace they weren't sure they could replicate. In the days that followed, the airline Delta issued an official statement. They praised their cabin crew, specifically Rachel and Patricia, for handling the situation with professionalism and care. They reaffirmed the airline's commitment to treating all passengers with dignity regardless of race, gender, or background. The statement was measured, corporate, and exactly what you would expect from a company managing a public relations situation. But there was a line in the statement, buried near the end, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention, that said, "We are grateful that Ms. Carter's grace and composure helped prevent the situation from escalating further." Grace and composure. That was how they described a woman who had been publicly accused of not belonging in a seat she had paid for, on an airplane she had every right to be on, in a country she had helped build with her work, her taxes, and her talent. Grace and composure. And maybe that's the part of this story that stings the most. Because Monica Carter shouldn't have needed grace and composure. She shouldn't have needed to stay calm while a stranger told her she didn't belong. She shouldn't have had to be the bigger person while someone smaller tried to make her feel small. She had earned her seat, not just the one on the airplane, but the one in life, through decades of intelligence, discipline, and the kind of relentless, quiet excellence that builds empires without ever asking for applause. And yet, even with all of that, the degrees, the companies, the billions under management, the board seats, the philanthropic work, she still had to sit in seat 2A and prove to a stranger that she deserved to be there. That is the lesson of this story. And it is not a comfortable one. The lesson is not that Daniel Whitmore was a bad man. Maybe he was. Maybe he wasn't. Maybe he was a man who had been raised in a world that taught him certain assumptions and never gave him a reason to question them. Maybe, in the quiet of his hotel room after the phone call that ended his career, he genuinely didn't understand what he had done. Or maybe he understood perfectly and simply didn't care until the consequences arrived. The lesson is this: every interaction is a mirror. Every encounter with another human being reflects back the truth of who you are. Not who you think you are. Not who your business card says you are. Not who your bank account says you are. But who you actually are, in the moments when you think the person across from you doesn't have the power to hold you accountable. Daniel Whitmore looked at Monica Carter and saw a woman who didn't belong. Monica Carter looked at Daniel Whitmore and saw a man who didn't know where he was. She was right. He was in the presence of someone extraordinary, and he treated her like she was ordinary. He was sitting next to the woman who signed the checks that kept his company solvent, and he told her to move to economy. He was 18 inches away from someone who would build more in a single decade than he would build in his entire life, and he called her people like her. There is a saying that goes, "Be careful how you treat people on the way up, because you will meet them on the way down." But this story teaches a harder truth. Sometimes the person you look down on is already above you. Sometimes the person you dismiss is the one holding the keys. Sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one who doesn't need to tell you they're powerful, because real power never does. Monica Carter went back to work. She continued building her empire. She continued investing in companies, creating jobs, funding scholarships, and making the world a little better than she found it. She never spoke publicly about the incident again. Daniel Whitmore went home to an empty house. He updated his resume. He made phone calls that went to voicemail. He learned, in the slowest and most painful way possible, that the world does not owe you respect just because you believe you deserve it. And somewhere, in an airport terminal, on another flight, in another city, another person is about to make the same choice Daniel made. They are going to look at a stranger and decide, based on nothing but appearance, that the stranger doesn't belong. And they are going to be wrong. The question is, will you be that person? Or will you be the one who remembers this story, pauses, and chooses differently? Because respect costs nothing. But disrespect? Disrespect can cost everything.